dancing through life, skimming the surface, finding where turf is smooth. Life's more painless when you're brainless. Why think too hard when it's so soothing? Look, there's only so many songs in this musical with my range. I just didn't want to do the Defying Gravity riff. Welcome back to StillerBros at the Movies, where today we're covering what is, for a lot of people, the movie of the holiday season. Us, well, we'll see. Wicked.
This is going to be a bit of a long one. We got about 125 years of history to cover for people, so let's get started.
So L. Frank Baum's famous The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was a book that we have never read, but we have been well aware of it as the basis for one of the most popular classical movies of all time.
It took about 40 years for at least one of those books from that series to eventually be turned into a feature film. That, of course, was the 1939 version, which, despite not doing well theatrically upon release and the somewhat tumultuous production of it, it went on to become regarded as one of the greatest movies ever made.
And it's hard not to see why. Even from a technical standpoint, the very idea of starting a movie in black and white and switching to Technicolor at the 10-minute mark is really the technical marvel of its day.
Yeah.
And of course, it's kind of amazing that a movie that's almost 100 years old now, it has very little in the way of problematic elements. There's no moments that's suddenly slightly racist. There's nothing that just suddenly makes you think, oh wow, that was a different time. Okay then.
Other than maybe thinking about the fact that one of the actors was almost suffocating to death because of makeup, and Judy Garland was subjected to the early stages of what we now refer to as the Lindsay Lohan experience.
The Wizard of Oz became a classic over the years, and over the decades, it's become a childhood favorite of millions and millions of people all over the world, to the point that it has been parodied, remade, reimagined, sequelized, prequelized, spun off. Most of it is just based off the popularity of the movie. I don't know how people typically think about the book, but the movie is one of those things that people truly, truly adore, which is why it's kind of weird that MGM is one of the few studios that has not jumped on remaking it or redoing it or sequelizing it in any way.
I mean, part of the reason why so much of the Wizard of Oz stuff that has come out since that initial movie 85 years ago has basically come down to it's weird how different everything is.
But the thing is, it's different specifically because the characters of the Wizard of Oz are in the public domain, but the movie is not.
Yeah, so they have to be very careful with the way that they portray certain elements.
If they want to throw the Wicked Witch of the West somewhere in there, they cannot make her a certain shade of green, otherwise that's breaking the copyright.
Because in the book, she was not green. They also can't have the slippers be ruby.
So theoretically, they could go with the classic silver slippers from the original book.
And then the Cowardly Lion cannot be anthropomorphized.
He has to be a big lion.
Because that's how he was in the book.
But, yeah, despite the fact that pretty much every other studio in Hollywood would probably love the rights to The Wizard of Oz because it's such a stone-cold classic, Turner Classic Movies still plays it every Christmas on an all-day marathon.
Yeah, but MGM's the only ones who haven't touched it, and part of that is because sequels weren't really a thing in the 30s and 40s when the movie was gaining prominence. Unless
you were some serialized detective story of some kind, probably weren't seeing those same characters over and over again.
And also, again, it was a famously tumultuous shoot. It went over budget by $1 million, which was a lot back then. And it did not really make its money back on its initial theatrical release.
Obviously, through re-releases and merchandising and countless re-airings on television, it's made its money back and then some, and just become MGM's flagship movie. But at the time, it struggled.
Yeah, So, yeah, thank God for when the television came to be, and in the 50s it ended up gaining prevalence by MGM deciding, yeah, we can give the TV rights for this one if this stupid fad of television is going to stick around for a little while.
But we've talked a little too much about this movie, and so we're just going to kind of skim over stuff like Return to Oz, The Wiz, Oz Great and Powerful,
Legend of Oz,
and all these other ones that have come up over the years. And we'll just skip to 1994 when Gregory Maguire decided that he was going to do something a little different for the time. That he was going to make this kind of far-out idea of, hey, what if the villain wasn't the villain?
And what if we told an origin story for a beloved story?
Yeah, needless to say, Greg Maguire accidentally may have caused the fad that Hollywood is still going through all these decades later.
And because in the 90s it was obviously very, very not a thing where people would prequelize a popular thing.
But basically, this all started with a book back in the 90s, Wicked, The Life of the Wicked Witch of the West, in which, from what we've heard, is a bit more racy than the actual musical.
This was more an adaptation of the book than the musical. This would not be a bubbly, PG, family, come see this during Thanksgiving, a break kind of movie.
In fact, it might have been an HBO miniseries that airs between seasons of House of the Dragon. But somewhere in there, someone decided to make it a Broadway musical. And so that musical came to Broadway 20 years ago this year, Wicked.
And Wicked became one of the most influential musicals of the last 2 decades. It helped kind of sort of launch Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth into more Broadway stardom than they already were in.
It practically made them household names. There's at least 5 of the songs are some of the most iconic Broadway hits that every theater kid knows. So sorry for everyone who's ever had to take a long car ride with them.
And it gave Idina Menzel arguably her most iconic song until about 10 years later when a little film called Frozen hit the scene.
Through it all, Wicked is still this beloved Broadway icon. Some people are still mad that it lost the Best Musical Tony to Avenue Q that year. And
we have no dog in this fight because we're not really big theater kids.
We have an appreciation for the theater and musicals, but we don't like go to New York every chance we get and watch every single Broadway show that we can get into the ticket lottery for. But we are well aware that that is a turf war that goes on. So,
anyway, now 20 years after the initial release of that Broadway musical, we are finally getting something that the fans of this show have been clamoring for pretty much since it opened, a theatrical feature film.
So, apparently, they sold off the movie rights to Wicked way back when it was just a book. But then at some point, the theater producers reached out to Universal Pictures and said, hey, we'd like to make this into a Broadway musical. And if you'd like, you can adapt the musical instead of the book and probably get a broader audience in there.
And so Universal sold the stage rights off, and that ended up becoming probably one of the best decisions they've ever made financially, because Wicked became a huge smash on Broadway. So the movie was kind of a thing where everybody who loves money at Universal was getting excited for.
Of course, now it's been 20 years. Why has it been 20 years? Well, the simple thing is, development is a bitch.
This movie has gone through multiple directors, multiple iterations. So much work has gone into it to try to make this thing work. So far, it took 20 years until about 2021 when enter John M. Chu,
the director of In the Heights and Crazy Rich Asians and Now You See Me Too and Gem and the Holograms. But basically, John M. Chu is the guy to finally push this thing over the finish line.
And he got a pretty stacked cast to take on these iconic roles that have been originated by some massive talents.
So we got Cynthia Erivo taking on the role of Elphaba, the future Wicked Witch of the West, and we have got Ariana Grande, credited under her birth name, taking on the role of Glinda, the future Good Witch of the North.
Along with them, we have a cast filled out with the likes of Jonathan Bailey, Ethan Slater, Bowen Yang, Peter Dinklage, Michelle Yeoh, and playing the wizard himself, Jeff fucking Goldblum.
So it's not an exaggeration to say that this is a very stacked movie, and it's also not an exaggeration to say that this movie has a lot riding on it. Universal's been working on this in one way or another for almost 20 years now, and this is also probably something that I'm sure John Chu has been waiting for a long time, judging by a lot of the movies that he picked up after Crazy Rich Asians. An epic. A big, sprawling cast of characters playing around in a world that is not our own, with big, elaborate sets and costumes and just wonder beyond wonders.
Now, epics can be a little bit of a hit or miss situation in Hollywood. Ever since Cleopatra, we've had a lot of different Hollywood movies that have tried to take the epic scale. And occasionally you'll get something like a Gladiator or a Lord of the Rings or a 2001: A Space Odyssey. But then you'll also get stuff like Exodus and Mortal Engines and even more recently The Hobbit, and then of course this year Megalopolis.
You realize that a bunch of people forgot that those existed, right?
Yeah, I know, but I had to a whole little epic rant about the Hollywood epic saved up, so I needed to pull those out of my ass.
Speaking of Hollywood deciding on weird things, hey look, it's another musical that forgets to advertise itself as a musical. I don't know what Hollywood's beef is with musicals. Like, if you don't think that people will want to go see your musical, why do you keep greenlighting musicals?
I mean, part of it might be because the last time Universal tried to do a massive big budget musical about 5 years ago, I want to say it started the plague, but the timeline's a little fuzzy.
It does kind of seem like God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, saw Cats and was immediately like, oh, I need to punish humanity for allowing this to exist.
Like, you had a good run, guy. You're done. I tried the flood thing. I guess it didn't work, so we're just gonna try plague.
But jokes aside, Wicked is once again probably a bunch of people's most anticipated movie of the holiday season, mostly because of the stacked cast. I've started to doubt how passionate the Ari-nators are nowadays because of the fact that she completely lost when she was a coach on The Voice. But, you know, maybe they'll actually push this through, especially since, oh look, this is a holiday weekend, this is a beloved musical, and also our theater is nearly full when we were buying tickets for this.
Yeah.
Kind of the opposite of last time.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what this is, especially because this is only the first half of the story.
Yeah. The other thing that they did when they decided, hey, we're finally going to make Wicked, was, oh, by the way, this is a lot to make, so how about we split it in half? Now, when you're adapting a Broadway musical, and you decide you want to split it in half, there's a clear place to make the splits, because Broadway musicals are more often than not told in two halves. So the thing with that is that part one of Wicked here is longer than the full Broadway musical.
Yeah.
And they have not added any songs as far as anyone can tell. So, don't know what they did. Don't know if that's going to weigh it down or anything like that. We just know that that's a thing that's happening.
Yeah. So I guess we should stop talking now because we've been going on for like almost 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's basically it. Wicked, it's there. Hopefully we enjoy the musical splendor, and hopefully nobody in our theater decides that they're going to sing along without any care, because, hey, it's a theater. People are around you. Don't sing. So, yeah, the critics who have been saying that this is a pretty good version of itself have been 100% right, because this is a pretty good version of the story that they have been touting it as for 20 years.
Yeah, it is exactly what you want. It shockingly probably won't fall victim to the John Carter effect of it all, but it's hard to say for sure.
Like, basically, I don't know if we've talked about it on this show before, but we're going to talk about it here. The John Carter effect is something that we have talked about where, essentially, if something has been around long enough that it's basically had its base elements picked clean to the point where by the time that it eventually they decide to adapt the original, then it will eventually be not as revered as it has been in the pieces. Like when Disney finally adapted John Carter after so many of the things that John Carter influenced were created, or when...
Similar to Ghost in the Shell, when that eventually was adapted.
Now, granted, there were other problems with the Ghost in the Shell movie, but whatever. Wicked is another movie that could fall under that, specifically because Hollywood has very much jumped onto the what if the bad guy wasn't a bad guy storylines with the likes of Maleficent and Cruella and stuff like that.
But at the same time, this is a tale that has worked for so long for a reason, and let's talk about this a little more.
So, first of all, I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. I think the Defying Gravity sequence, though stretched out a little too long in places, which is obviously where the extra 2 hours comes from, but I think that the Defying Gravity sequence is just good enough on its own that it almost justifies the ticket price just from that.
It is amazing in every way. It is John M. Chu's finest hour as a director. It is Alice Brooks's finest hour as a cinematographer. Christopher Scott's finest hour as a choreographer.
Everything just fits together to create this cohesive whole that alone, as like a 10-minute short film, it would probably be worth just the admission alone. Now, granted, there is a whole other movie in front of it, so you can actually get to know these characters a little bit better, but I think that the fact that the Defying Gravity sequence works makes up for that.
And a lot of that has to do with the chemistry between Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo.
The thing about it is that these two really are very aware of the energy they need to put out to play these characters for this half of the movie. Cynthia Erivo is just playing this character who has been downtrodden for her entire life, looked down on for her looks, and just been judged before anyone knew her, and she finds a sense of justice throughout the run of the movie. And Ariana Grande's Glinda is just essentially, I'm going to spend this entire movie just being the pampered little rich girl that eventually learns, hey, other people matter, which isn't the most original character arc, but, you know, we all gotta have something. But the fact that so many people have been saying, yeah, this is a really fantastic performance by Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo, oh, yes. And to the people who say that Ariana Grande is not doing it right, well, she's basically just doing Kristen Chenoweth.
Yes.
It's very clear that she is channeling her friend, original Glinda, Kristen Chenoweth.
Oh, but at the same time, there are quieter moments where she does show off a little bit more subtlety in her mannerisms and her acting.
And that's perfect for a character that's essentially written as like this comical ditz for most of the movie. And to have her have these moments where she is a legitimate character and not just, oh, I'm sorry, were other people's opinions important and not just me making myself feel better by being what I think a good person is?
But she also has her little plastics click that follows her around and kind of makes her helps her ego grow a little bit. And again, this is all just kind of the kind of character she is.
And Peter Dinklage, I was wondering about, because his character is a CGI animated animal which he has to voice over, and Peter Dinklage, when it comes to voiceover, it doesn't always hit the mark. He's a fantastic actor, no doubt about that, but when it's stuff like Destiny or Transformers Rise of the Beasts, he doesn't quite bring his A game always.
He's not a bad actor by any means, but his voice acting can But voice acting is a completely different muscle to regular on-screen acting. But this time around, Dinklage does very good, and it helps to contribute to this movie being surprisingly timely 20 years after the inception of this entire story.
Yeah, shockingly, a movie that's been in one form or another of production since the Bush administration is suddenly becoming relevant again in this modern times. I know we said we were going to be escapism, but
it's hard to...
But damn, did this movie end up falling into the perfect era.
It is almost disgustingly infuriating how relevant this movie is. This movie shouldn't have had to be relevant, but it is.
Like Winnie Dolzman's script from 20 years ago, which has been updated to now, obviously, because it's a completely new screenplay. Shockingly, it matches up with a time when teachers are vilified for simply deciding to actually point out that some people in history weren't perfect.
And and having just individuals who did nothing wrong except exist are ripped away by guards, dragging them away to imprison them forever.
Anyway, also in the mix is, of course, Jeff Goldblum, who, if you don't know already what the twist is to Jeff Goldblum's character as a whole, you're probably going to get it spoiled a couple times. This is very much for fans of the Broadway musical, so there's moments where you're kind of like, wait, did I just recognize? Uh-oh. I think I just got spoiled. And so, if you don't know certain things about Wicked, then yeah, you're gonna be spoiled here and there. It's just a fact of it. But anyway, Jeff Goldblum is fantastic. His charisma really is perfect for playing this huckster who needs to convince people that he is more than what he appears to be.
And he is able to do all that even though he basically only shows up for the last half hour of the movie.
And Michelle Yeoh has this heel turn that really allows her to sink her teeth into this role. At first, it's just basically she's a normal teacher with one little song at the beginning of the movie, but then this turn happens, and it's like, oh, there's the reason Michelle Yeoh is playing this part.
Just continuing Michelle Yeoh showing off that she should have gotten that Oscar years ago.
And of course, we've got just a whole bunch of fantastic musical numbers that are with just incredible choreography, montages that you could not do on the stage. I can't speak for how accurate this is. I really think that they action-movied up the final scenes of the movie, but this is really just a movie that seems to understand it. And yes, at some points it just kind of feels like, oh, you shot it like a bog standard modern movie without any kind of color or anything like that. But really, other times it's abundantly clear, oh, right, we do know how to shoot a musical to remind you that realism is not a thing we're worried about.
Especially when we're in a world where realism kind of has to take a back seat, because Oz ain't exactly real in the real world.
So, yeah, I really think that the people who were complaining about how the trailers looked kind of bland had a point, but if you watch the actual rest of the movie, there are sequences where they will remember that musicals can stretch your verisimilitude to allow you to see things like bright and poppy colors and fantastic choreography.
And speaking of the rest of the movie, we come to the parts that we now have to wait a year for the second half of this story.
Yeah, and the fact of that is, there is a lot in this movie that is basically leading up to the next movie, like the fact that a lot of the leitmotifs in the score are for songs that won't show up until the next movie.
And we also have a lot of storylines that are hanging in the air right now.
But for right now, this is a pretty good version of the first half of what might be a good movie, depending on how Part 2 does. And we know there will be a Part 2 because Well, one, they've been advertising the hell out of this.
But they didn't advertise that it was a two-parter?
And for another thing, they already shot it, so unless something terrible happens this weekend and the box office numbers just completely collapse in on themselves, I don't think we'll have a problem with this movie actually having its sequel completed and released sometime next year.
Yeah.
So, that's it for right now. Wicked is, it's good.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it my movie of the year, but I would say that it's worth a watch, and if you're hesitant about watching half of a story, then I guess wait until we get a release date for the next one, and wait and watch it just before you go to see it.
Yep.
But that's it for right now. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, comment what you may or may not have thought of Wicked Part 1 in the comments down below, and don't forget to tune in next time when we know the way. Bye.